Ying and I grew up in the same Florida city, just a few miles apart, but his Chinese American world could have been light years away from mine in racially segregated Jacksonville, Florida. Or was it? Interesting things occur when you start to explore each other's cultures, the things we hold dear, and each other's lives one-on-one.
But within that community, we were very isolated to a large degree, and not many people had cars, and you had to use buses, and then of course we were restricted in where we could go because of the Jim Crow laws. What was it like for you growing up then?
Well, it's funny. You look back at our differences, and they're really not that much of a difference. I grew up in, I guess it would be the Murray Hill section on the Riverside West Side, near West Side of Jacksonville, and we rode buses a lot too. My mother going to work every day would ride the bus, and I would catch buses going into downtown. And for another reason, economics. It was my parents were at the time building up a small Chinese restaurant in Jacksonville, so they didn't have maybe the financial wherewithal to buy cars, all that on a regular basis. So I grew up riding buses a lot. But I remember the excitement we had when my father first, bought his Chevrolet.
Oh, really?
So, yeah.
How old were you then?
Oh, I think I was about 6 years old, and I remember him taking us out to the drive-ins.
Right.
That was a big thing to do back then, was to go to the drive-ins and then go in our business in Jacksonville, our restaurant business. And I remember it's a big Navy town, so we have a lot of people coming in and out in the service to eat dinners and all that. And I remember one time there was an African-American gentleman came in with some Caucasian people, and to sit down and eat. And I remember, I guess I must have been about, 10 years old at the time, 10, 11 years old. And I remember how it was my father or my uncle, whoever was in the dining room, had to go up and let them know that they could not serve the group there because there was an African-American gentleman there, and the laws did not permit that, in that the restaurant could be sanctioned for serving African Americans in the dining room. I just remember kind of like just my disbelief that could really happen. Traveling throughout the South, we never lived in or checked into, say, a Holiday Inn or a motel. We always stayed with Chinese families. We always ate in Chinese restaurants because you could never tell whether or not we'd be served anywhere in our travels throughout the South.
Seeing people, I think, don't necessarily think about that because I think the perception is, well, Chinese Americans are just very clannish and they just stay together and don't want to associate with other groups.
Well, there was maybe some truth to that, quite honestly, maybe up north, but I think in the South, just for your own self-survival and the fact that you did not want to run into a confrontation, it was easier just to stay with your own kind, so to speak.
Yeah. And I don't remember people talking too much, at least not, in my household, about people of Asian descent. Otherwise, it was just sort of, people were there and there was a store, and I think there was another little grocery store or something, but it was like a shadowy presence. And I'm just wondering, if that was because of living in the South where we were, and it may have been different in the North, or if African Americans and Asian Americans, and Chinese Americans in this case, tend to have this shadowy relationship.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's probably a true statement. Maybe we were living on different planes of existence at the time, but I do remember growing up, you really can't describe her as a nanny. It was a friend of the family who was an African-American lady, very kind lady. And in growing up, I guess when I was 4, 5, 6 years old, she would take care of me when my parents were in the restaurant because, they had to go in early, they worked lunches, and then in the afternoons they were getting ready for dinner, so it was very little time to really take care of myself and my brother. So she stepped in and kind of became our surrogate mother. And I remember one of my earliest recollections of the African American community was going to a church I guess I could describe it as a service, a revival almost, in an African American church. What an experience for yes, for a 6, 7-year-old child. You know, the choir was up there having a great time, and the minister was preaching as hard as it was just an eye-opening experience for me.
And your parents
I still remember that.
And your parents were okay with that?
Oh yes, very much, very much.
Yeah.
Well, they were converted to Christianity in China and married by a Presbyterian minister in China. I felt almost persecuted, quite honestly, in Jacksonville, which was probably a different perception than, say, the African American community, and that's because a lot of people assumed, for rightly or wrongly, that all Asians were Japanese, and they had bombed Pearl Harbor, and there I was, the person who had probably committed this dastardly deed. And I remember trying to explain as I was growing up, I'm not Japanese, I'm Chinese. So that was maybe it was a unique experience for an Asian American growing up in Jacksonville, and especially in a town that had the heavy military influence like Jacksonville. Just a lot of kids that I ran into my age just had this misperception that somehow all Asians were bad because they had attacked the United States.
But yet you got involved in so many things, and you were involved in sports. You were the first Asian American page in the United States House of Representatives and all. So.
Well, I think that kind of, honestly, I was just at the right place at the right time, if for no other way of describing it aptly. There was a lot of change going on. I always needed to put my best foot forward, and it can be a real pressure experience for a teenager growing up, always trying to measure up to this level, this goal that your parents expected you to, or the community expected you to. So,
well, the model minority.
Oh,
that
yes,
goes
getting
for
back,
a lot of us
yes,
too, or being the token of being one of the first, like I've experienced.
And I never realized that until later on, getting into a sociological discussion about the model minority and how truly that's a misperception that there are all kinds that make up the Asian community, just as if there are all kinds that make up society in general. There are some parallels in the Asian community to the Cuban community, because you saw that the first wave of, for instance, Cubans coming to the United States became very successful, very hardworking. And later waves of immigrants were less successful. They were maybe from a lower economic, socio-economic background in Cuba. And it was similar with Asians, so with a lot of Asians. There's a group in the Asian American community, and it would be wrong to broadly paint the entire Asian community as model citizens. There are some who are struggling.
Sometimes there's envy, I think, among a lot of us. Native-born Americans and African Americans in this case, envy of those of strong immigrant backgrounds who can identify those roots and still have that tie.
But even those of us that are native-born, I was born in the United States, we all come from somewhere else. And we can never lose sight of the fact that there are differences amongst us, but the more you explore and look into it, the more similar we all are. We all come from different
all come from somewhere else.
As opposed to the African American experience growing up in the segregated South, where you knew you weren't welcomed here or you were welcomed there. I felt as a Chinese or Asian American growing up in the segregated South, I really didn't know where I was welcomed and where I wasn't welcomed. There was a lot of confusion and I guess disconcerting feelings at times, whether or not there was an acceptance there.
What interests me is the fact that no matter, as I've discovered with the research and doing diversity workshops and all that, no matter what culture you talk about, there always seems to be a name, and a negative name to some degree, for people who cross cultures, who move out of their comfort zone to the other. And within the African American culture, we've had it for a long time. Oreo, black on the outside, white on the inside. Then I met this guy from who is Puerto Rican, actually, and we were doing a session there. Oh yeah, it's coconut. brown on the outside, white on the inside. And then lo and behold, some years later, I met an Asian American. Oh yeah, we have that too. Yellow on the outside, white on
Our
the
famous
inside.
banana.
Our famous banana, yeah. So I guess you find it, I'm sure the Native Americans have something similar too.
Exactly, and it all goes back to the fact that we think we have differences among us, but in fact, we're all come from similar experiences.